horrible, preventable and totally unnecessary way to die. Heart-wrenching testimony from the mother of a teenage girl who was crushed to death at a student party.
It's now feared more than 2,000 people have been buried in a landslide in Papua New Guinea.
Hospitalisations for respiratory illnesses are soaring, and so are COVID cases. So how's our health system preparing for a busy winter? Tēnā tātou katoa, good evening. A mother has told the coronial inquest today how her teenage daughter was crushed and suffocated to death on the dirty floor of a grotty Dunedin flat during an overrun student party 5 years ago.
At first, Sophia Cristani's parents believed it was a tragic accident until evidence suggested that a culture of out-of-control parties had played a significant role.
Now the inquest will determine whether it could have been avoided and how safety can be improved. Keisha Brownlee reports.
Adorning a Dunedin courtroom, a portrait of Sophia Cristani depicting her bubbly and vivacious personality. The night of the 19-year-old's death promised fun with friends.
She ended up crushed and suffocated to death on the dirty floor of a grotty student flat amongst the bodies, sweat, the feet, the shoes, the bottles, cans and other party detritus. Horrible, preventable and totally unnecessary way to die.
Sophia's family were in court today as the coronial inquest seeks to determine what happened on October 5th and 6th, 2019.
The party was called Maggot Fest. It was to be the last party at the Manor, a named student flat located at 124 Dundas Street.
It was the last party to be held at the Manor and the last before final exams. Roughly 400 people were invited on Facebook.
The event page said, open quote, "Time to get maggot one last time. The uni has bought this place, so let's make this last a doozy."
The court heard the Manor had a history of large parties. Since February 2019, noise control had attended at least 10 times. The university had warned them of multiple concerns, including overcrowding.
The tenants decided to block access to all of the rooms in the house except 3.
At some point, just before midnight, people fell near the bottom of the staircase that was heavily congested.
Sophia became caught underneath others in a pile-up of approximately 30 fallen people.
The court heard a series of phone calls from partygoers to due to the sheer number of partygoers.
Eventually the pile was cleared and Sophia was located lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs.
Sophia's parents told the inquest they never wanted her to attend Otago University.
Because of the general reputation for student partying, drinking and antisocial behaviour.
Behaviour they believe took their daughter's life, and behaviour they've tried to change ever since, creating Sophia's charter and memorial scholarships in her honour.
We want Sophia to be remembered as a beacon, a shining light for positive ongoing change. Her life must not be lost in vain.
Police interviewed roughly 160 students. The inquest will hear from 21 of them, including 6 tenants of the Manor. Keisha Brownlee, News Hub.
Officials in Papua New Guinea now say more than 2,000 people are feared dead after a huge landslide ripped through an isolated village in the centre of the country.
The landslide covers the equivalent of 3 to 4 football fields and is 6 to 8 metres deep. And authorities say getting supplies to the site has proved extremely challenging. Here's Nick Trubridge with the latest.
Standing upon metres of unstable earth, they dig for buried bodies. Nearby, the chilling sound of grief as locals carry the dead in coffins. Then there are community leaders' pleas for help to find the missing.
Responsible people, disaster office, provincial government, Red Cross, Progress Joint Venture, national government, local level government.
But it isn't easy. The landslides near Papua New Guinea's isolated centre in what's known as Enga province. It's about 600 kilometres away from the country's capital, Port Moresby.
You can get to the site that has been affected by road from the provincial capital, Wabek, but it takes 2 hours minimum because of the associated risks coming with tribal fighting that is sometimes capitalized on by opportunists who wish to carry out raids.
At Kaukalam village, the situation is desperate. Entire families killed. The little livelihood people here had has been destroyed.
There's an elementary school that's buried, fully buried. We have houses, buses, vehicles, hotels, guest houses. Let's say more than about 50 stores, mothers, projects, all gone, all vanished.
NBC Papua New Guinea's Emmanuel Aurelia has been filing reports as more and more bodies are found.
One is a 25-year-old young man by the name of Amo. We've only found his right foot trapped under the debris this morning.
They take to the disaster zone with spades and axes, and with more effective equipment hard to come by, they'll be digging for days yet.
Nick, a tragic and developing story. And you've just received a copy of a letter from authorities to the United Nations. What does that say?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. I suppose the first thing to note here is just how fast things are developing in this story. On Friday, it was over 100 people feared dead. Just this morning it was 670. Now it's over 2,000. So this is changing rapidly. In terms of that letter, I've got it right here. We understand that this is going to have major economic impacts on the country. That's because the Pugera mine, which is a major gold mine in the country, of course it's a mineral-rich country, is completely blocked off. So there's no access there whatsoever. As you heard up the top, over 2,000 people now feared dead. The other thing is this landslide is still moving. So the locals are on top trying to dig, but it's still completely unstable. We've heard just in the last half an hour that the Australians are sending some Hercules aircraft there to assist. Christopher Luxon's just been asked at Post Cabinet whether we will do the same. Effectively, we're on standby, but tomorrow morning we here at News Hub are expecting to talk to the United Nations country rep, who should have a fairly substantial update for us. So keep your ears peeled for that.
Nick, thank you for the update. Well, medical experts are calling for Kiwis to be vigilant and to get vaccinated as we head into winter.
Already in Auckland, the number of hospitalisations for severe respiratory illnesses is significantly higher than this time last year, and wastewater testing shows we're in the midst of the biggest COVID wave since 2022. Alice Wilkins has the story.
4 years on from the arrival of COVID, and these little double lines are still with us. Wastewater testing shows
at the moment, I'm very cold and achy. I've got headaches on and off.
Professor Michael Baker says currently around 35 COVID cases are being admitted to hospital each day. And diminishing immunity could be playing a role because many people haven't had a booster vaccine for some time.
This recent spike is actually the highest level we've seen for almost 18 months. You have to go back to 2022 when we had 3 big waves to see this number of viral particles in our wastewater.
Data from the Institute of Environmental Science and Research shows Auckland hospital admissions for respiratory illnesses, including COVID, are up 13% on the same time last year. But the most common respiratory virus among those tested in hospital is RSV.
There's a bit of a risk what people predict in the overseas that we may have to cope not with an epidemic of influenza but a duodemic of influenza and COVID, or even a tridemic of influenza, COVID and RSV.
A vaccine for RSV is now available, and Te Whatu Ora says vaccination is still the best way to reduce pressure on hospitals over the winter months. But as demand grows, regions are working together to cope.
District hospitals working more collectively together, to share the workload if one's getting a particular pressure point, they've got workforce issues or, a demand on that day or week.
So those who need care can get it when the double lines strike.
And Alice, with all the rain expected this winter, could there be other health issues?
Yes, new research shows that there is a greater risk of cryptosporidium outbreaks when we experience extreme rainfall events. That's because a high level of the tummy bug causing parasite can get washed into waterways from things like livestock when we have heavy rainfall. Now, thanks to climate change, these extreme weather events are of course becoming more common, and experts are saying that there now needs to be more research into that link between waterborne illnesses and extreme weather.
Alice, thank you.
News Hub can reveal more than 200,000 people are in need of drugs sitting on Pharmac's waitlist. Medicines, the drug buying agency, said it would fund if it had the money.
And now all eyes are on this week's budget to see if National will keep its promise to fund more cancer drugs. Political editor Jenna Lynch has this exclusive report.
Lydia Pei-Perera and Vicky Hudson-Craig, both hardworking, loving mums, both in their 40s, and both have cancer.
I've got stage 4 melanoma, which has spread to my heart.
They found a mango-sized lump in my stomach.
They also both rely on drugs not funded by the government.
When they said it wasn't funded, I think it was just terrified. I just remember, well, we just all cried. There was 3 of us in the room, we just cried.
Oh, look, I'm always pissed off, always. It's not something that you want to hear.
Both of the treatments they're taking are on Pharmac's options for investment list, basically a wish list of drugs it would fund if it had the budget, but it doesn't. So they each need to rely on fundraising $5,000 to $6,000 a month.
You know, hard enough just to buy bread and milk for some families, and asking somebody to come up with $6,000 on top of everything else that's going on for them, just living in general.
Having cancer, on its own, that's enough to battle, but then to be constantly worrying about how you find that level of money just to stay alive is just, it's impossible, right?
In December 2022, the number of patients expected to benefit from treatments on Pharmac's waitlist was 172,000. By March this year, that had grown by more than 50,000 to 228,000, a 32.6% increase.
We're the only country in the world that has a waiting list for medicines, and some of those medicines have been sitting there for 15 years or more.
I'm living proof that this drug can work, so why wouldn't you want that for me? Why doesn't the government want that for me?
National pledged on the election campaign to fund 13 cancer drugs. Lydia's wasn't on the list, but Vicky's was. She needs them to keep their promise.
Will that be funded in this year's budget? Because there are people right now that are relying on those drugs that are looking to you for help.
I'm not making an announcement about that today. What you have seen is that we had to find $1 billion more than anticipated simply to keep the Pharmac budget going.
You know, our lives are dependent on it, and that promise was a lifeline.
She wants to be here to see her little girl Ruby grow up.
I can't imagine having grown up without my mum, and I don't want that for her. It's as simple as that, really.
To her, this year's budget isn't just tax cuts versus spending cuts.
It's literally life and death.
It cannot get more serious than that.
OK, Jenna, Budget Week has officially kicked off, so what can we expect on Thursday?
The government is describing this budget as a tough choices one. Nicola Willis outlined today how they've been kind of shaking down the public service to find any saving they can. She said that ministers had identified 240 government programs that can either be trimmed back or canned completely to fund either new programs or the promised tax cuts. Now, Nicola Willis wouldn't be drawn on how much money they had raked in from that savings exercise, and after the bombshell out of the blue announcement last week that they were scrapping the first home buyer grant, she also wouldn't rule out scrapping other programs they hadn't campaigned on cutting.
New Zealanders will be surprised at exactly where so much of their money has been going. We have uncovered a layer cake of government initiatives, many of which we had never heard of before, which were absorbing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
Now, when it comes to those cancer drugs, National did promise they would be funded from this year, but Nicola Willis wasn't willing to give the same assurance that she has been giving around the tax cuts that they will be part of this year's budget. She also would not be drawn on whether they were pushing ahead with targeting the free prescriptions policy to just community service card holders and superannuitants. That was how they were going to find the $70 million a year to fund these cancer drugs. So patients like Vicky will just have to wait until Thursday to see whether they need to keep fundraising for their life-saving cancer treatment.
Political editor Jenna Lynch live at Parliament. Thanks very much. Another 40 Kiwis have been flown out of New Caledonia on a Defence Force flight. It comes as the country's state of emergency is set to lift after more than a fortnight of rioting. A final flight is planned for tomorrow for a handful of New Zealanders still there.
Our NZDF C-130s have now brought more than 300 passengers out of Noumea in the past week. Many of those are New Zealanders, but we're also helping our friends from 14 other nations depart as well.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says they are expecting a small number of New Zealanders to remain in New Caledonia after the final flight and say they will stay in touch with them.
Whakaari White Island's crater lake has changed significantly since the Bay of Plenty volcano began erupting last week. GNS scientists today flew over the island on a gas monitoring flight and they filmed these pictures. They say the vent area has changed and the lake level has dropped in height. Small eruptions began on Friday, with steam and gas sending material up to 30 metres in the air. The volcanic alert level, though, remains at 3. Well, let's have a little look at today's weather now, and it was a very cold start today, Heather, wasn't it?
I've had a few people complain to me. It's that time of the year though. Plenty woke to frost. Tekapo dropped to -4, Christchurch and Queenstown -3. Everyone has been under the influence of that cool and showery southwest flow. So similar conditions with tomorrow, much of the same, but things are changing. Ironically, it warms with the beginning of winter. Details after sport.
Thanks, Heather. Well, Hamas has launched its first rocket attack on Tel Aviv in 4 months. Hours later, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens of people living in a tent camp in Rafah.
Another flight hit by turbulence, with the climate becoming more volatile, and aviation researchers says airlines need to adapt.
And an incredible feat of flying in Sydney as a light plane skims rooftops before skidding to a halt.
Hoki mai anō, welcome back. A strong warning about this next story. It contains details and images that will disturb some viewers. Hamas launched rockets into Tel Aviv in Israel today for the first time in nearly 4 months, but there were no reports of any injuries.
Hours later, Israel launched an airstrike on a tent camp where displaced people were sheltering in Rafah. Israel described the camp as a Hamas compound where significant terrorists were operating. And as Juliet Speedy reports, at least 35 people were killed.
It was supposed to be a refuge for those fleeing Israel's offensive in Rafah. But the Israeli military struck this camp, leaving horrific scenes. A man holding a headless child, among a death toll in the dozens. This eyewitness says families were killed by Israeli missiles as they baked bread. But nobody has left the camp. There's nowhere to go. Instead, they wash away the remains, bury the dead, and wait out another day.
Isn't this awful? We came here and we saw catastrophes. We want to flee, but we do not know where to go. Where can we go?
Survivors will likely be treated at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, one of the only health facilities that's returned to service, albeit slowly.
We need a ceasefire for this hell to stop.
For nearly 8 months, Israel has targeted Gaza's hospitals, insisting Hamas fighters are embedded inside. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, Hamas forced Israelis to run for cover, the first time in months. In a show of military strength, they fired a barrage of rockets from Rafah to central Israel. Most of them were intercepted. One house took a direct hit. Thankfully, the bedroom was empty.
The US's own intervention in Gaza came unstuck when part of its aid operation for the Strip washed up in southern Israel. A setback for the much touted floating pier of aid that cost around $320 million. A desperately needed solution, reduced to a spectacle on the beach. Juliet Speedy, News Hub.
Destiny Church has confirmed that it has stood down a youth worker who is now being investigated by police following claims of sexual abuse. In a lengthy Facebook post, leader Brian Tamaki says he had nothing to do with the worker and that the church hadn't appointed him as a youth ministry leader. He does say, though, once the church became aware of the allegations, the individual was prohibited from attending Destiny Church. Tamaki says he applauds police for looking into the case.
Well, turbulence has caused injury again, this time on a flight from Doha to Dublin that saw 8 people hospitalised.
One aviation researcher warns that severe turbulence could become more common in a warming climate. But another expert says airlines simply need better safety protocols. Zane Small has the story.
Ambulances on the runway at Dublin Airport. 8 passengers were taken to hospital yesterday after a flight from Doha experienced turbulence.
The plane just seemed to go stop, which it didn't, but then dropped. It was very scary.
Just a week ago, 71 people were hospitalised after severe turbulence on a Singapore Airlines flight. It was carrying 23 New Zealanders. A British man died of a suspected heart attack. Australian aviation researcher Geoffrey Thomas warns severe turbulence could become more common in a warmer climate.
There is absolutely no doubt that climate change is impacting the weather systems as we've seen around the world.
He pointed to research published last year by the University of Reading. It linked warmer air to a 55% increase in severe turbulence over the past 4 decades on flights across the North Atlantic. But independent aviation commentator Irene King isn't convinced.
The focus has to be not on blaming the climate and Mother Nature, but on developing some really robust technological solutions.
She believes airlines need better safety protocols to avoid injuries.
I think there's going to have to be some solutions around cabin interiors, in looking at how we prevent some of these injuries.
The turbulence on the Qatar Airways flight struck when food was being served.
Dinner came off my lap.
The last few incidents are a wake-up call for operations of airlines to say we need to be sharper.
Qatar Airways says it's conducting an internal investigation. Zane Small, News Hub.
Well, Andrew's in later with sport, and what a win for the Waz, Andrew.
So good, mate. Yeah, they've overcome the absence of a staggering 11 players to notch a vital win over the Dolphins. So how did coach Andrew Webster sum up one of the most inspired wins in the club's history, and why the night became a double celebration for one player in particular? And the race that had it all, why today's Indy 500 is being hailed as one of the greatest of all time.
At least 18 people have been killed as tornadoes and storms tore across the US. Homes and businesses were destroyed in minutes as the twisters ripped through the Midwest and the South.
And a pilot in Sydney shows fantastic skill to land a plane that had lost power and was flying very low indeed. Over 100 million people in the central United States have been confronted by a series of deadly tornadoes.
The storms have claimed at least 18 lives across Texas, Arkansas and Oklahoma. And the violent winds and extreme hail aren't finished yet. Channel 7's Tim Lester reports.
In a Valley View truck stop and petrol station as travellers take cover. And the tornado hits. Little to see, but the sound is of raw fear.
Oh my God!
And this on a highway nearby as the twister surrounds a woman's car.
My ears are popping. We're in it, we're in it.
Valley View north of Dallas waking to destruction and news the storm had killed 7. One, a 5-year-old, another just 2.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It's just heartbreaking.
Other deadly storms striking Arkansas and Oklahoma, power cut to almost 400,000 residents. These storms come on top of weeks of wild weather across southern and central US states. As well, just days ago, forecasters warned Americans they now expect an unusually deadly hurricane season in the months ahead.
Well, a Sydney pilot is being labelled a hero after perfectly landing his plane without any power.
A news helicopter filmed the dramatic descent that had everyone watching, holding their breath, including the pilot and his passenger. Australia correspondent Emma Cropper has the story.
Coming in to land a small Cessna 210 with 2 passengers on board, and it's lost all power.
Bank Aotearoa, Mayday, Mag Yankee Whiskey, engine problem.
With no engine at all, it's just gliding, flying dangerously lower and lower. Now metres above homes, it becomes a heart-stopping approach into Bankstown Airport. It's so low, it clips this tree, but by some miracle, misses the roofs of these hangars.
Mayday, coming in. Mayday.
Then with a bit of luck and skill, touchdown. It comes skidding to a halt after 150 metres.
So he is on the ground and he's sideways, but he's stopped moving now.
That's the news helicopter that's filming, confirming what the control tower couldn't see, that miraculously everyone is safe, and despite emergency services on standby, they aren't needed.
Fortunately, he executed a textbook crash landing.
He is veteran pilot Jake Swanpole, emerging from the plane looking remarkably calm, along with his partner Karen.
It was scary and nerve-wracking.
The pair well aware how low they were flying.
It was very close. We didn't think we were going to make this landing strip here. We were thinking about all these homes that you could potentially, if you don't make the runway.
A few extra metres could have made all the difference, but incredibly, the pair walked away alive and uninjured. In Sydney, Macropa News Hub.
Incredible stuff. Well, Hollywood has been remembering a man whose music was the soundtrack to many of the Disney classics that have delighted adults and children alike.
Richard M. Sherman, along with his brother, wrote the Mary Poppins, Jungle Book and Chitty Chitty Bang bangers. At 95, his career could be summed up as Super Kelly and then